Have you ever experienced that moment when everything seemed to finally fall into place, as if every detail had been carefully aligned by God, and then, suddenly, everything shut down abruptly and inexplicably? An opportunity that seemed perfect, a relationship that seemed like an answer to prayer, a job that seemed like the definitive turning point in your life. Everything was too good to be true. And precisely because of that, when the door closed, the pain was even greater. The question that keeps echoing in your heart is inevitable. Why would God allow such a painful rejection? Perhaps, as you watch this video, a specific memory has already come to mind. A day when you woke up full of expectation, believing you were about to experience something new, something big. The signs seemed clear. Conversations flowed, promises were made, plans began to take shape. Everything pointed to a yes. And, deep down, you believed that this door wasn't just an ordinary opportunity, but divine guidance. After all, when something seems so certain, who imagines that God could say no? The problem is that God's no rarely comes with immediate explanations. It arrives silently. It comes as an unanswered message, a phone call that never happens, an unexpected negative response, a sudden withdrawal. And along with this no, come difficult feelings to deal with: frustration, sadness, confusion, shame, and even guilt. Did I hear wrong? Did I force something that wasn't from God? Did I fail spiritually? If you've been through this, you know how these questions can keep you awake at night and shake your faith. Have you ever been through this? Within the universe of prophetic messages, there's a truth that almost no one likes to hear. Not every rejection is a setback, and not every closed door is defeat. But understanding this in a moment of pain is extremely difficult. When something is denied to us, the immediate feeling is one of loss. It feels like something has been snatched from our hands. It feels like we've been left behind while others move on. And the most painful thing is that, often, those looking from the outside don't understand the magnitude of what happened. For others, it was just another opportunity that didn't work out. For you, it was a profound impact on your destiny. Perhaps today you are trying to reorganize your life after a no that didn't make sense. Or perhaps you are still in the middle of this process, feeling that something was interrupted prematurely. The truth is that there are doors that seem right because they make sense to our logic, our desires, and our dreams. But there are paths that, despite being attractive, hide consequences that only God can see. And that's where the spiritual mystery surrounding prophetic deliverances before destruction comes in. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because often God doesn't save us by obviously removing something from our lives. Sometimes He saves us by allowing something not to happen. Sometimes the greatest divine protection doesn't come as a visible miracle, but as a silent rejection. A door that closes at the last moment. A relationship that ends without explanation. A contract that isn't signed. A plan that crumbles when it seemed ready to begin. And, in that instant, all we can see is the pain. Stay with me until the end, because this conversation goes beyond stories of closed doors. We're talking about preserved destinies, avoided falls, future pains that never happened because God intervened first. We're talking about a no that, even though it hurts in the present, prevented something much bigger in the future. But this understanding almost never comes immediately. It usually arrives later, when time passes and the truths begin to emerge. Perhaps today you still can't see any redemption in what you lost. Perhaps you're still looking back, trying to understand where everything started to go wrong. But what if, in fact, nothing went wrong? What if that rejection wasn't the end of something good, but the obstacle to something that would destroy you later on? This is an uncomfortable but necessary question. Because not every opportunity is a blessing in disguise, and not every yes would take us where God planned. There are things that only make sense when viewed from a spiritual perspective. There are doors that seem right in our eyes, but dangerous in God's eyes. And there are rejections that, in heaven, are celebrated as protection. Perhaps you don't yet have all the answers. Perhaps it still hurts. Perhaps it still seems unfair. But something was being avoided, something was being stopped, something was being kept away from you, even if you can't see it yet. And it is precisely about that door that seemed perfect, about that unexpected no, and about what was happening in the spiritual backstage of her life that we are going to start talking about now. And perhaps, as you listen to all this, something inside you is starting to stir. Maybe a memory has returned, A specific door has come to mind, a no that still hurts a little. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It could be an experience you've lived through, a feeling you haven't yet been able to put into words, or even a question that arose while listening to this message. Sometimes, writing is the first way to organize what the heart hasn't yet fully understood. And your story, however simple it may seem, might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if, at any point during this video, you felt that you're not alone, that someone finally put into words what you've been experiencing in silence, consider liking this content. This simple gesture helps this message reach more people who are going through similar rejections, through closed doors that still don't make sense. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and continue bringing prophetic messages of hope and spiritual discernment to those who need guidance in the midst of pain. If you feel that this type of content resonates with your faith, your journey, and the questions you carry, subscribe to the channel. That way, you can continue to follow reflections like this one, which don't ignore the pain, but also don't lose sight of the purpose. Here, each video is structured as a conversation, as a safe space for those trying to understand God's ways, even when they seem confusing. And stay with me because what we're talking about now is just the beginning. There's still much to reveal about those no's that seem unfair, about rejections that hide prophetic deliverances, and about what God was protecting while you thought you were losing it. The story continues, and what comes next may completely change how you see that door that closed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a part of this story that almost no one likes to talk about, the silent pain of rejection. That pain that doesn't appear in words, but weighs heavily on the chest. The pain of when God says no and doesn't explain why. The pain of when everything inside you screams for answers, but heaven seems too quiet. This is where many people feel alone, weak, or even spiritually confused, without admitting it aloud. Rejection hurts not only because something didn't happen. It hurts because it attacks your identity. It makes you question decisions, revisit choices, doubt your own ability to discern God's will. Silently, the mind begins to construct harsh narratives. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I misunderstood everything. Maybe it was all in my imagination. And when these ideas accumulate, the impact goes far beyond the situation itself. It reaches your mindset, the way you begin to see new opportunities, new people, new doors. There's also a hidden shame in this pain. Shame for having believed too much. Shame for having told someone. Shame for having dreamed aloud. You start avoiding talking about it because it feels like you failed. It feels like you were deceived by your own hope. And the hardest part is realizing that, often, no one around you understands the depth of what you're going through. To an outside observer, it's just another rejection. For you, it was a rupture in your journey, an internal shock that changes how you trust, expect, and decide. And then comes God's silence. This is perhaps the most delicate point of all, because when we are in pain, we expect at least an explanation. We expect a clear sign, a direct word, something to alleviate the confusion. But this doesn't always happen. Sometimes, God remains silent while you try to piece together what's left. And this silence doesn't mean abandonment, but that's exactly how it's usually interpreted at first. The feeling is like talking to yourself, praying in the dark, walking without a map. This phase profoundly affects the spiritual journey. Faith ceases to be comfortable. Prayers become shorter, more cautious. You begin to measure your words, as if afraid of getting excited again. Rejection creates an involuntary emotional defense. You close yourself off a little. You guard yourself. You learn not to expect so much. And this, without realizing it, shapes future decisions. It alters how you react to opportunities, how you relate to people, and how you interpret signs. But there's a hidden truth in this process that's rarely spoken clearly. The pain of rejection doesn't come to destroy, it comes to reveal. To reveal limits, to reveal unrealistic expectations, to reveal dangerous attachments, and even to reveal emotional or spiritual dependencies that were being ignored. But this revelation doesn't happen immediately. It happens behind the scenes while you think you're just suffering. While you think you're standing still, something is being adjusted within you. Many people confuse rejection with failure, when in fact, rejection is a change of course. But changes of course are rarely smooth. They break the rhythm, disrupt plans, and defy logic. That's why it hurts so much. The mind tries to find someone to blame, and almost always the first target is yourself. But not all rejection is related to error. Some are related to protection, others to transformation, still others to emotional and spiritual maturity that needs to be built before the next step. The problem is that this construction happens invisibly. There are no applause. There is no recognition. There is no external confirmation. It's a solitary phase of the journey where you learn to deal with decisions not made, with endings not chosen, and with answers that didn't come. And even so, you continue. Even wounded, you move on. Even confused, you learn. That, too, is growth, although no one calls it that at that moment. Perhaps today you are experiencing exactly this part of the story, trying to move on without fully understanding what happened, trying to maintain faith while dealing with conflicting feelings, trying not to harden your heart, even after an experience that left its mark. If this is your case, know that this pain does not disqualify you. It does not diminish you. It is part of a deeper process of alignment, preparation, and internal repositioning. There are things that God doesn't explain because, if He did, you would try to fix them your way. You would try to insist. You would try to negotiate. You would try to stay where you shouldn't. Silence, in many cases, is a form of protection as powerful as a clear answer. It prevents you from returning to what has already fulfilled its purpose in your life. And even if this seems harsh now, there is something being preserved within you that is not yet ready to be exposed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because behind this pain lies a larger scenario, a spiritual layer that isn't perceived at first glance. There are connections that seemed promising but carried hidden risks. There are environments that seemed safe but compromised your essence. And there are paths that only reveal themselves as dangerous when we are already too involved. It is at this point that rejection begins to take on another meaning, even if it is not yet clear. Before continuing, write a simple sentence in the comments if this resonates with you. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a spiritual backdrop that's almost never perceived at the moment of rejection. While you were looking at the door that closed, God was looking at the entire journey. While you saw loss, He saw deliverance. While you felt the immediate impact of frustration, God saw future consequences that were still hidden, like a concealed truth that only time would reveal. We are trained to evaluate life by what is happening now, by what we feel now, by what seems logical now. But God's actions are not limited to the present. He works with panoramas, with destinies, with impacts that span entire phases of the journey. That is why, often, God's no sounds so strange, so harsh, so out of context. Because you were only analyzing one part of the story, while God was already seeing the end. There are decisions that seem harmless, but carry silent risks. Environments that seem promising, but slowly drain values, faith, and identity. People who arrive with the appearance of an answer, but who, over time, become sources of confusion, emotional exhaustion, and even spiritual estrangement. But none of this is visible at the beginning. On the contrary, everything seems positive, encouraging, full of possibilities. And it is precisely there that deliverance becomes invisible. In the Bible, there is a very clear principle. God doesn't just deliver from obvious danger, He delivers from danger that hasn't yet manifested. He closes paths before they become traps. He interrupts relationships before they turn into destruction. He changes routes before the impact is irreversible. But, for those inside the situation, this doesn't seem like protection. It seems like delay. It seems like loss. It seems like injustice. Perhaps you insisted on something thinking it was persistence, when in reality it was attachment. Perhaps you interpreted signs based on desire, not discernment. And that doesn't make you spiritually weak, it makes you human. God knows this limitation. That's why, in many moments, He acts firmly. Not because He wants to hurt, but because He wants to preserve. God's no, in these cases, is not personal rejection, it's a spiritual strategy. There's a verse that says God guards our going out and our coming in. This speaks of movement, direction, and decisions. Guarding isn't just protecting from what's already happening, but preventing you from going where you shouldn't. How many times have you given thanks for something that went right? But how many times have you stopped to give thanks for what didn't happen? For the contract that wasn't signed, for the relationship that didn't progress, for the door that closed before you got too involved? The problem is that this understanding almost never comes immediately. It comes later. It comes when you look back and realize the kind of environment you would have faced, the kind of person you would have become, the kind of impact that would have had on your faith, your family, your emotional health. Only then does no begin to take on a different meaning, not as punishment but as care. God doesn't just work with what you want now. He works with who you need to become later. And that involves choices you wouldn't make on your own. It involves interruptions you wouldn't ask for. It involves deliverances you only recognize when you mature spiritually and emotionally enough to understand. That's why often deliverance hurts, because it involves shattered expectations, frustrated plans, and the need to let go of something that seemed certain. There is also an even deeper spiritual aspect. Some doors close because the spiritual environment behind them was not healthy. Not everything that seems like an opportunity comes filled with light. There are places where your spiritual sensitivity would be numbed, relationships where you would need to diminish yourself to fit in, paths where you would need to compromise principles to remain. And God, who sees behind the scenes, does not allow you to advance where your essence would be compromised. This doesn't mean you'll never face challenges. It means you won't face unnecessary challenges. There are pains that are part of the journey, but there are destructions that can be avoided. And God's no, in this context, is an invisible fence. You hit it, you get hurt, you get frustrated, but you don't fall into the abyss that was right ahead. Only at that moment all you can feel is the impact of the hit. Perhaps today you are still trying to understand why something so promising was interrupted. Perhaps you are still struggling to accept that it wasn't meant for you, even though it seems so aligned. But something is being preserved. A future is being protected. There is a version of you that still needs to reach places you can't even imagine. And certain doors, if they had remained open, would have robbed you of exactly that. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we begin to see rejection as protection, something changes within us. Our mindset begins to align. Future decisions become more conscious. Pain begins to gain context. And, little by little, you realize that what seemed like an end was just a necessary detour within a much larger journey, which is still unfolding step by step. If this part of the message resonates with you, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a crucial point in this journey that only reveals itself over time. It's when the dust settles, emotions calm down, and, almost without realizing it, you begin to see things that were previously completely outside your field of vision. What seemed unfair, confusing, and even cruel begins, little by little, to take shape. Not instantaneously nor magically, but realistically. It's as if the truth, which was hidden behind the scenes, begins to surface piece by piece. In the beginning, nobody sees anything. The pain still speaks louder. The mind is still stuck on what if, and the heart still insists on asking why it didn't work out. But time has a curious characteristic. It reveals. It reveals intentions, it reveals environments, it reveals people, it reveals consequences that were camouflaged at the beginning. And suddenly, you start hearing news, noticing movements, seeing falls you never imagined before. That company that seemed solid faces serious losses. That relationship that seemed perfect ends in scandal. That promising partnership transforms into wear and tear, conflicts, and emotional destruction. And it is at this moment that something changes within you. Not because the pain has completely disappeared, but because it begins to make sense. You realize that if you had remained there, you would have been affected as well. You would have experienced the same pressure, the same collapse, the same inner exhaustion. But you were no longer there. You were removed beforehand, not through your own merit, but through divine intervention. What seemed like a personal loss begins to be seen as a collective deliverance, but experienced individually. Many people only understand this when they look back with emotional maturity, when their mindset is no longer trapped by the needs of the moment, but open to the revelations that time brings. You start connecting the dots. You begin to remember small warnings you ignored, strange sensations you tried to justify, discomforts you minimized because you wanted things to work out. All of this comes back to mind now with a different weight, not as an accusation but as a lesson learned. And then comes the relief, a silent, profound, almost spiritual relief. That thought that arises from nowhere, thank goodness I wasn't there anymore. Thank goodness this didn't progress. Thank goodness God closed that door. This relief doesn't erase the past, but it gives new meaning to the experience. It transforms pain into discernment. It transforms frustration into maturity. It transforms rejection into belated, but sincere, gratitude. There are stories that only make sense after the impact. People you found admirable reveal a character you couldn't stand being around. Environments that seemed healthy turn out to be toxic behind the scenes. Decisions that seemed simple reveal themselves to be complex traps. And suddenly, you realize you were spared emotional, spiritual, or even physical destruction without even noticing. This powerfully validates the prophetic message because it shows that God doesn't act impulsively. He acts with precision. Perhaps you know someone who went down the same path you almost followed and now bears deep scars. Perhaps you watched from afar the downfall of something you once deeply desired. Perhaps you saw news, reports, consequences that made your heart ache, followed by a thought difficult to admit. This could have been me, and it could have, but it wasn't, and that changes everything. This realization isn't meant to generate fear, but awareness. It adjusts how you make decisions from now on. You start listening more, observing more, feeling more. You understand that not all haste comes from God, and not every opportunity deserves a yes. Time, when it reveals hidden truths, also reveals the invisible care that was present all along, even when you thought you were alone. And the further you advance on this journey, the more you understand that God's no wasn't the end of something good, but the beginning of something preserved. Something that didn't yet have a clear form, but that needed you whole, not broken. It needed you conscious, not deluded. It needed you strong inside, not just excited on the outside. This understanding changes the impact of that rejection on your story. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this understanding prepares the ground for something even greater. When time reveals the truth, it does so not only to explain the past, but to align the future. There is a next level of discernment, clarity, and purpose that begins to form when you accept that you have been spared. And it is precisely at this point that the story begins to take on a new meaning, still under construction. If this resonates with you, comment below, "This makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a central truth that completely changes how you see your own story. That no didn't delay your life, it saved your destiny. This is difficult to accept at first, because our minds associate progress with open doors and success with continuity. But in the kingdom of God, progress also happens when something is interrupted. Growth also happens when a cycle ends sooner than we imagined. God doesn't close doors on a whim. He doesn't play with expectations, nor does he create unnecessary frustrations. Every no carries a purpose, even when that purpose isn't immediately revealed. The problem is that we interpret the closing of a door as a definitive loss, when, in reality, it's often a redirection. It's God saying, "This isn't the way," even if that path seemed comfortable, promising, or even spiritual in your eyes. There is a huge difference between delay and preservation. Delay pushes you backward without explanation. Preservation prevents you from moving forward to something that would compromise everything that is yet to come. And when God says no, he is not taking away something good to punish you, but blocking something that would affect your essence, your identity, your faith, and your future decisions. However, at that moment, you don't yet have the emotional maturity or spiritual vision to perceive this. Deliverance rarely seems like a miracle at first. A miracle is something we celebrate in the moment. Deliverance often is something we cry about first. It comes disguised as loss, frustration, a broken plan. It comes as a painful no, as an unsettling silence, as a rejection that shakes self-esteem. But behind this pain, there is a divine strategy working behind the scenes of your journey. When God closes a door, he is not only protecting you from what would happen there, but also from what you would become if you stayed. There are environments that negatively shape mindset, relationships that drain vision, purpose, and spiritual sensitivity, paths that demand dangerous inner compromises, almost imperceptible at first. God sees these hidden layers. He sees the accumulated impact, not just the isolated event. Saving a destiny doesn't mean avoiding all pain, but avoiding destruction that would irreversibly change the course of your life. Perhaps that open door would lead you to choices you couldn't undo later. Perhaps that relationship would distance you from who you truly are. Perhaps that opportunity would demand versions of yourself that weren't true, merely adapted for survival. And God, who knows the end from the beginning, acts before it happens. That's why God's no often comes when everything seems right. Because if it came when everything was wrong, it would be easy to accept. The real test is trusting when logic says yes but God says no. It is at this point that faith ceases to be discourse and becomes practice. It is at this point that the spiritual journey ceases to be comfortable and becomes transformative. Over time, you realize that no kept you whole. Whole emotionally, whole spiritually, whole in your values, whole in your vision. You didn't need to break to learn. You didn't need to fall to mature. You didn't need to lose everything to understand what's essential. You were stopped beforehand. And that, too, is grace, even if it didn't seem that way at first. There's a version of you that only exists because that door closed. A more conscious, more sensitive, more discerning version. A version that learns to listen more and rush less. To discern more and try less. To trust not only what seems good, but what is truly aligned with purpose. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it begins precisely at the point of rejection. Perhaps today you can look back and realize that if you had followed that path, you wouldn't be here now. You wouldn't have the same clarity. You wouldn't have the same emotional strength. You wouldn't have the same faith. Perhaps you would be trying to rebuild yourself from something that God had already saved you from before it even happened. And that changes everything, because it transforms the narrative of a victim into someone preserved, from someone rejected into someone protected. God's no doesn't end stories. It prevents wrong stories from continuing. He doesn't eliminate purpose. He protects it from premature wear and tear. He doesn't take something away from you, he keeps you for something. And even if you don't yet know exactly where you're going, knowing where you've been delivered from is already part of the healing and alignment process. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when you understand that destiny has been saved, a new way of walking is born. A new posture towards decisions. A new sensitivity to perceive when to insist and when to let go. And this internal change prepares you to recognize the next doors, not only for their brilliance, but for the peace, coherence, and purpose they carry. If this message resonates with you on any level, comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, speaking directly to you who are experiencing a no right now, in the present, still fresh, still painful, still confusing. You who aren't looking back trying to understand, but are in the midst of the impact, in the midst of the frustration, in the midst of the waiting. You who wake up and go to sleep with the feeling that something was interrupted without warning, as if the ground had shifted from one moment to the next. If this is your reality, this part of the conversation is for you. Perhaps today you are trying to maintain your faith while dealing with conflicting feelings. On one hand, you believe in God, trust in His purpose, and know that He is good. On the other, your heart aches, your mind questions, and your soul feels weary of not having clear answers. And there is a silent guilt in this, as if questioning were a sign of spiritual weakness. But it isn't. Questioning, in this context, is part of the journey. It's part of the process of inner transformation that happens when something is beyond your control. If that door has closed now, in the middle of your plans, perhaps God is protecting you from something you can't yet see. Not because you're naive, but because there are hidden truths that only reveal themselves with distance. There are impacts that only become visible when it's too late. And there are decisions that, if made today, would exact too high a price tomorrow. God sees this entire timeline while you can only see the present. It's important to understand that protection doesn't always come with an immediate sense of relief. Sometimes it comes as frustration. Sometimes it comes as a broken expectation. Sometimes it comes as a silence that seems like abandonment, but is actually care. The problem is that our mindset has been trained to recognize God only when everything flows, when everything opens up, when everything moves forward. But God also acts when He prevents, when He hinders, when He says no. Perhaps today you are insisting on understanding the reason for the rejection, when the safer question is another: what am I being protected from? What is God preventing me from facing now? What kind of emotional, spiritual, or mental strain hasn't reached me because that door closed before? These questions change the perspective. They take you out of the victim role and put you in the place of someone who is being cared for, even without realizing it. There is an active faith that is born in these moments. It is not the enthusiastic faith of good days, but the mature faith of difficult days. The kind that doesn't depend on visible signs to keep moving forward. The kind that decides to trust even without understanding. The kind that chooses not to harden the heart, even after a deep disappointment. This faith doesn't make noise, but it builds structure. It adjusts the mindset, strengthens future decisions, and prepares the ground for choices more aligned with purpose. Perhaps today you just need to change how you're interpreting this no. Not as a definitive blockage, but as a strategic pause. Not as a personal failure, but as a liberation in progress. Not as the end of something good, but as the beginning of a preservation that you are not yet mature enough to fully see. This doesn't lessen the pain, but it gives it meaning. And meaning changes everything. God is not behind in your life. He hasn't forgotten you either. The fact that a door has closed doesn't mean you've been left behind. Sometimes it means the exact opposite, that you didn't move forward too quickly, that you didn't go where you would lose your peace, that you didn't get involved in something that would require versions of yourself that weren't true, that you were kept safe to continue whole in the next stage of the journey. While you try to understand the present, God is already taking care of tomorrow. He is preserving your faith, your sensitivity, your identity. He is preventing you from carrying burdens that were not meant for you. He is freeing you from cycles that would start well but end in exhaustion, confusion, and prolonged pain. And even if today all you feel is loss, something is being silently saved. This is a phase of internal repositioning, a phase in which you learn to listen more than to run, to discern more than to insist, to trust more in God's character than in circumstances. It's not comfortable, but it's profound. It's not quick, but it's safe. And it's forming in you a clarity that will be essential from now on, when new doors begin to open. Perhaps you can't yet express gratitude for this no, and that's okay. Gratitude doesn't need to be forced. It arises when understanding arrives. For now, simply trust, simply persevere. Simply don't allow this rejection to steal your hope or harden your heart. Because what God is preventing today may be exactly what will preserve your peace, your faith, and your destiny tomorrow. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a practical way to discern when a closed door is protection, and how this prepares you to recognize the right doors more clearly when they open. But before continuing, if this message resonates with you right now in your life, comment below, "This makes sense to me." If you've stayed with me this far, it's because this conversation touched on some point in your story. And when that happens, it's worth continuing to walk together. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss messages like this, which help you see more clearly what God is doing even when it seems silent. This space exists precisely for that, to bring understanding, direction, and peace amidst processes that aren't always easy to navigate. If this message was for you, please leave a comment below. Write something simple, like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." It's a way of saying that you've made it this far, and also of strengthening this community of people who are on the same journey of faith, learning, and transformation. And if, at any point in the video, you felt a connection, relief, or clarity, please leave a like. This helps this content reach other people who may be experiencing the exact same kind of no, and still can't understand why. There's a video here that complements this topic and further explores this perspective on closed doors, purpose, and God's direction. Click on it and continue the conversation there.